Have you ever felt like your mind is constantly running, but somehow you're still going nowhere? You wake up with good intentions, yet by the end of the day, everything feels just as confusing as before. More noise, more information, more pressure, yet less clarity about what your life should actually look like. And here's the strange part. The solution might be something most people completely overlook. What if the key to rebuilding your focus, your direction, and even your future was something as simple as walking alone in silence each morning? This might sound too ordinary to matter, but the story you're about to hear proves the opposite. Because one man, lost, overwhelmed, and unsure about his future, discovered that a quiet daily habit could slowly transform the way he thinks, decides, and lives. And by the end of this story, you might realize that the clarity you've been searching for is much closer than you think. So stay with me, because what started as a simple morning walk ended up changing the entire direction of a man's life. Most people carry a storm inside their minds, even when everything on the outside looks normal. Bills, expectations, unfinished goals, and quiet fears pile up until the mind never really rests. Thoughts start racing the moment the eyes open in the morning. And by the time night arrives, the brain feels like a crowded room where nobody stops talking. It's exhausting, yet strangely, many people believe this chaos is just how life is supposed to feel. You can see it everywhere if you pay attention. A man scrolling through his phone while his coffee grows cold. A woman staring at her computer screen, rereading the same sentence 5 times. A young person lying awake at night, replaying conversations and worrying about tomorrow. The mind keeps running, even when the body begs for a moment of peace. The strange part is that the world rarely notices this struggle. People go to work, smile politely, answer messages, and continue their routines. But behind those quiet smiles, something deeper is happening. Their thoughts are tangled like headphones pulled from a pocket, and the harder they try to untangle them, the tighter the knots seem to become. Over time, this mental noise begins to shape how people live. Decisions feel heavier than they should. Simple problems start looking like impossible mountains. Confidence slowly fades, replaced by hesitation and doubt. And without realizing it, a person can begin drifting through life instead of truly steering it. Here's the real trap. Most people try to solve mental overwhelm with even more noise, more scrolling, more information, more opinions, more distractions. They fill every quiet moment with something, anything, to avoid their own thoughts. But the mind never gets the chance to breathe. So the fog stays, thick and stubborn. Imagine trying to see clearly through a window covered in dust. You could stare harder, squint, or even blame your eyesight. But the real solution isn't more effort. It's clearing the glass. The same thing happens inside the human mind. Clarity rarely appears through force. It appears through space. Yet very few people ever learn how to create that space. They were taught how to work harder, react faster, and stay busy. But no one showed them how to quiet the constant mental noise. So they keep pushing forward with a tired mind. And eventually, many begin to feel lost without understanding why. Somewhere in the world, at this very moment, there's a man feeling exactly like that. His mind is crowded, his future uncertain, his direction blurred. From the outside, he looks like any other ordinary person. But inside, he's wrestling with questions he can't seem to answer. And his story is only just beginning. Somewhere in a quiet neighborhood, long before the city fully wakes up, there's a man who moves through life almost on autopilot. Not because he's lazy, not because he lacks intelligence, but because somewhere along the way, he lost his sense of direction. His days blur together like pages in a book no one bothered to read. Work, obligations, worries, sleep, then the same cycle again. And deep down, he can't shake the feeling that life is passing him by. If you saw him on the street, you probably wouldn't notice anything unusual. He looks like any ordinary man heading to work. But inside his mind, questions echo constantly. Am I doing the right thing with my life? Is this really all there is for me? Those questions follow him everywhere. They ride with him during his commute. They whisper while he eats lunch alone. They sit quietly beside him late at night when the world finally grows silent. And the strange thing is, the more he tries to ignore them, the louder they seem to become. Responsibility has slowly wrapped around his life like heavy chains. Bills arrive every month without mercy. Expectations from others pile higher each year. And somewhere in the middle of trying to survive it all, he stopped asking what he truly wanted. Now he simply moves forward, because stopping feels even more frightening. Once, a long time ago, he had dreams. Real ones. The kind that made his eyes light up when he talked about them. Ideas about who he could become, places he could go, things he could build. But little by little, life pushed those dreams further into the background, until one day they felt more like distant memories than real possibilities. The hardest part isn't failure, it's uncertainty. That quiet, uncomfortable feeling of not knowing where your life is heading. When every path looks foggy, every decision feels risky, and every year that passes adds another layer of doubt. So he keeps doing what most people do when they feel lost. He stays busy. He fills his time with work, distractions, responsibilities, anything that keeps him moving, because movement feels safer than standing still and facing the truth. But deep inside, he knows something isn't right, and although he doesn't realize it yet, the real struggle he's facing isn't outside of him. It's happening inside his own mind, a quiet battle between confusion and clarity. And soon, that battle will begin to shape everything that happens next. At first, the feeling was subtle, almost easy to ignore. Just a quiet sense that something in life wasn't moving the way it should. Days passed, responsibilities were handled, and from the outside everything looked fine. But inside his mind, thoughts began piling up like unfinished conversations. And slowly, that quiet discomfort turned into something heavier. Each morning started the same way. The alarm rang, and before his feet even touched the floor, his mind was already racing. Deadlines, worries, decisions, regrets, one thought chasing another. It felt like trying to listen to 10 voices speaking at the same time. By the time the day began, his energy was already half gone. During work, he tried to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting. A simple task took twice as long as it should. He reread messages, second-guessed decisions, and overanalyzed everything. The more he tried to concentrate, the more his mind scattered in different directions. It was like trying to hold water in his hands. Evenings weren't much different. The body felt tired, but the mind refused to slow down. He would sit quietly, staring at nothing in particular, replaying the day. Small mistakes felt larger than they really were. And the future, well, the future felt like a fog he couldn't see through. This kind of mental exhaustion does something strange to a person. It steals clarity. It makes strong people feel weak and confident people hesitate. Over time, even simple decisions begin to feel overwhelming, and life slowly turns into survival instead of progress. Sometimes he wondered if everyone felt this way. Maybe this confusion was just part of being an adult. Maybe everyone else was also pretending to have things figured out. Still, there was a quiet voice inside him whispering something different. A voice saying life wasn't supposed to feel this heavy. There were moments when he tried to reset. He'd distract himself with entertainment, scroll endlessly through his phone, or stay busy late into the night. But those distractions worked like temporary bandages. They covered the discomfort for a moment, yet the confusion always returned the next day. And then one night, lying awake in the dark, he realized something unsettling. This cycle had been repeating for far too long. If nothing changed, the same year would repeat itself again and again. That thought alone was enough to make his chest tighten, because deep down, he knew something inside him was reaching its limit. Some changes in life don't arrive like thunder. They begin with a quiet realization that something can't continue the way it has. For him, that moment came after a long night of restless sleep. He had tossed and turned for hours, his mind replaying worries like a broken record, and when morning finally arrived, he felt more tired than when he had gone to bed. The room was silent, but his thoughts were louder than ever. Questions piled on top of each other until they felt impossible to ignore. How did my life start feeling like this? Why does everything feel so heavy all the time? He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, realizing something had to give. It wasn't one big disaster that pushed him to this moment. No sudden collapse, no dramatic failure. It was the slow accumulation of mental weight, weeks turning into months, months turning into years. Until one morning, he simply couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. That realization can be uncomfortable, even frightening, because admitting something must change also means admitting the old way isn't working. And most people avoid that truth for as long as possible. But sometimes life quietly corners a person, leaving only two options: continue drifting or finally take control. As he sat there, the world outside began to wake up. Cars passed on the street. A distant door slammed. Somewhere, a bird cut through the morning silence with a sharp call. And for the first time in a long while, he simply listened. There was something strange about that moment. For a few seconds, his thoughts paused, not because his problems were gone, but because he had stopped running from them. It felt like standing still in the middle of a storm, just enough stillness to realize how chaotic everything had become. That's when a simple truth crossed his mind. He didn't need to fix his entire life overnight. He didn't need a perfect plan or some magical breakthrough. What he needed was space. Space to think clearly again. But how do you create that space in a world that never seems to slow down? How do you quiet a mind that has been racing for years? He didn't have the full answer yet, but deep inside, something had shifted, and the decision he would make next would begin changing everything. The strange thing about real change is that it rarely begins with something dramatic. No grand announcement, no perfect plan, no sudden burst of motivation. More often it starts with a small, almost quiet decision, a decision so simple that most people would overlook it completely. And on that morning, sitting alone with his thoughts, he made one. He realized he didn't need to solve everything at once. Trying to fix his entire life felt like trying to lift a mountain. But what if the first step wasn't about solving problems? What if it was simply about clearing his mind long enough to see them properly? That idea lingered in his thoughts like a door slowly opening. He remembered something he had once heard years ago, an old piece of advice that at the time had seemed almost too simple to matter. Walk in silence before the world wakes up. No phone, no music, no distractions. Just walking and letting the mind breathe. At first, the idea felt almost ridiculous. How could something so ordinary possibly help with problems that felt so complicated? Yet something inside him resisted dismissing it. After all, everything he had tried so far involved adding more noise to his life. Maybe what he needed wasn't more effort, but less. So he made a quiet promise to himself. Nothing extreme, no massive lifestyle overhaul. Just one simple commitment. Every morning before the chaos of the day began, he would step outside and walk, alone, in silence. No scrolling through his phone while walking. No podcasts filling the empty space. No rushing from point A to point B. Just walking slowly enough to actually notice the world around him. And maybe, if he was patient, notice what was happening inside his own mind. The next morning, he set his alarm a little earlier than usual. Not by hours, just enough to create a pocket of quiet time. As the alarm rang, he hesitated for a moment under the warm blanket. Part of him wanted to stay exactly where he was, but another part whispered, just try. Sometimes the most important changes begin exactly like that. Not with certainty, but with curiosity. One small action that interrupts the old pattern. One step taken before the mind has time to argue. And the next morning would reveal whether this simple decision meant anything at all. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More Too Bonus for You. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. That first morning walk left him with more questions than answers. The streets were quiet, the air cool, the world still half asleep. Yet inside his mind, thoughts continued bouncing around like restless echoes. Part of him wondered if the whole idea had been pointless. Still, something about the silence felt different. Later that day, while sitting with a cup of coffee, he stumbled across an article online. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, just a simple piece about the mind. The author described how constant noise keeps people disconnected from their own thoughts, and how something as simple as walking in silence can slowly untangle the mental chaos. The words made him pause. The article explained something most people never consider. When the mind never experiences silence, it never gets the chance to organize itself. Thoughts pile up like papers on a messy desk. Important ideas get buried beneath worry and distraction. But quiet movement, like walking, creates room for those thoughts to rise to the surface. The concept wasn't complicated, but it was powerful. Walking engages the body just enough to calm the nervous system. At the same time, silence gives the mind space to breathe. Together, they create a rare condition many people never experience anymore. A state where clarity can finally begin to appear. That idea stayed with him throughout the day. He thought about how often he filled every quiet moment with noise. Music while driving, videos during meals, scrolling through his phone whenever boredom appeared. Maybe his mind had never truly been alone long enough to think clearly. Maybe the answers he had been searching for weren't hidden somewhere far away. Maybe they were simply buried under layers of distraction. And perhaps silence wasn't emptiness at all. Perhaps it was where understanding quietly grows. That evening, the thought returned again. What if those morning walks weren't about exercise? What if they were something closer to a conversation with himself? A daily meeting between the man he was and the man he could still become. So the next morning, when the alarm rang again, he didn't hesitate as much. He stepped outside into the soft light of early dawn. The streets were still quiet, the air still cool, and this time, he walked with a new curiosity about what might happen next. By the third morning, something inside him had shifted. The walks were no longer just an experiment. They were becoming a quiet appointment he had made with himself, a small pocket of time before the world began demanding his attention. And surprisingly, he started looking forward to it. He decided to turn this simple idea into a daily ritual. Nothing complicated, nothing rigid, just a gentle structure. Wake up early. Step outside before the noise of the day begins. Walk slowly, without distractions, and let the mind speak. The first few minutes of each walk were always the same. His thoughts would rush forward like a crowd leaving a stadium. Worries about work, random memories from years ago, little frustrations he hadn't even realized he was carrying. But instead of fighting those thoughts, he allowed them to pass. Step after step, he simply observed them. It was almost like watching clouds move across the sky. Some were heavy, some were light, some disappeared quickly, and gradually the sky of his mind began to clear. As the days passed, he started noticing things he had ignored for years. The way the morning light stretched across quiet streets, the distant sound of birds waking up before the city, the rhythm of his own footsteps on the pavement. These small details had always existed. He had just been too distracted to see them. Sometimes he used the walks to ask himself simple questions. What actually matters to me? What am I avoiding? What small step could make today better than yesterday? He didn't demand immediate answers. He just allowed the questions to exist. For anyone watching this story unfold, the lesson is surprisingly practical. You don't need a perfect location to try something similar. A quiet neighborhood street, a small park, even a calm sidewalk will do. The key isn't the distance you walk. The key is protecting that silence. Morning after morning, the ritual grew stronger. His body began waking naturally before the alarm. His mind slowly stopped resisting the quiet. And while nothing dramatic had happened yet, something subtle inside him was beginning to change. Because when a person finally creates space for their thoughts, the mind starts revealing things that noise had been hiding. Ideas, realizations, uncomfortable truths, unexpected clarity. And sooner or later, one of those quiet moments is about to challenge him in a way he didn't expect. But here's something people rarely talk about when they describe positive habits. The beginning is rarely peaceful. In fact, the first few days of silence can feel strangely uncomfortable. And for him, those early walks brought thoughts he had avoided for years. The quiet didn't immediately bring clarity. It brought confrontation. Without distractions, his mind began surfacing old memories. Mistakes he wished he had handled differently. Opportunities he had once ignored out of fear. Conversations that had ended the wrong way. Thoughts he had buried suddenly came knocking again. At first, he wondered if the walks were making things worse. Why was his mind louder now than before? Why did silence seem to uncover more questions instead of answers? For a moment he considered abandoning the whole idea. After all, distractions had always been easier. But there's something important about silence that many people misunderstand. When the noise disappears, the mind finally releases what it has been holding. It's similar to cleaning a cluttered room. Before things look organized, everything must first be pulled into the open, and that process can feel messy. So he kept walking, not because it felt comfortable, but because something inside him knew it mattered. Step after step, he let the thoughts come and go. Some mornings felt peaceful. Others felt like wrestling with his own mind. Yet slowly, something interesting began happening. The thoughts that once appeared chaotic started forming patterns. Certain worries repeated themselves again and again. Certain regrets carried lessons he had never fully understood, and certain dreams, long forgotten, quietly resurfaced. This is where many people give up on personal change. They mistake discomfort for failure, but sometimes discomfort simply means you're finally paying attention. It means you've stepped out of the constant distraction. And now you're hearing the truth your mind has been whispering. So morning after morning, he kept walking, through doubt, through quiet reflection, through thoughts he had avoided for years. And without realizing it, his mind was slowly preparing him for something unexpected. Because clarity rarely arrives all at once. It builds quietly beneath the surface. Until one ordinary moment, during one ordinary walk, something suddenly clicks into place. And when that moment comes, it can change the direction of a life. Weeks passed, and the walks slowly became part of his life. Not a dramatic routine, not something he talked about with others, just a quiet habit that belonged only to him. Morning after morning, he stepped outside before the city fully awakened, and little by little, something inside his mind began to change. The first difference was subtle. His thoughts no longer arrived all at once like a chaotic crowd. Instead, they began appearing one at a time. Problems that once felt tangled started separating into clearer pieces. And once a thought could be seen clearly, it no longer felt so overwhelming. He noticed it during the day as well. At work, he paused before reacting to stressful situations. Instead of rushing decisions, he gave himself a moment to think. That tiny space between reaction and response made a surprising difference. It was as if the morning silence had trained his mind to slow down. Another shift began happening with his emotions. Frustration still appeared, of course. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, but the emotions didn't control him the way they once had. He could feel them, observe them, and let them pass. That simple awareness made him feel stronger than before. Sometimes, during his walks, new ideas surfaced unexpectedly. Small improvements he could make in his daily life, ways to organize his work more effectively, conversations he needed to have but had been postponing. Nothing revolutionary, just steady steps forward. One morning, while walking past a quiet park, he realized something important. The chaos that once filled his mind hadn't disappeared overnight. It had been slowly dissolving, layer by layer, just like fog lifting from a landscape when the sun begins to rise. Clarity had been growing quietly the entire time. This is the kind of progress most people overlook, because it isn't loud. There are no dramatic breakthroughs or instant transformations, just a gradual strengthening of the mind, the kind that builds patience, focus, and confidence. And that's when the walks started feeling different. They were no longer just about clearing his thoughts. They had become a place where ideas could grow, a quiet environment where decisions could finally take shape, almost like a workshop for the future he was beginning to imagine. But one morning, during a walk that seemed no different from the others, something unexpected happened. A single thought appeared with unusual clarity. Not a worry, not a regret, but an idea strong enough to change the direction of his life. That morning began like many others. The sky was still painted in soft shades of gray and gold. The streets were quiet, almost as if the world had paused for a moment. He walked at the same steady pace he had practiced for weeks, but something about that day felt different. His mind was calm in a way he hadn't experienced before. Not empty, not sleepy, just clear. Thoughts appeared slowly instead of crashing into each other. And in that unusual stillness, one particular idea rose to the surface. Simple, yet powerful enough to stop him in his tracks. It wasn't some magical secret or complicated strategy. It was a realization about his own life. For years he had been waiting for certainty before taking action, waiting until he felt completely ready, waiting until fear disappeared. But during that quiet walk, he saw the truth clearly. No one ever feels completely ready. Clarity doesn't arrive first. Action creates it. People who move forward despite uncertainty are the ones who eventually discover their path. And suddenly, that idea felt obvious. He stood still for a moment on the sidewalk. Cars began passing in the distance as the city slowly woke up. But inside his mind, something had shifted. The fog that once surrounded his future had thinned just enough to reveal a direction. Not the entire road, just the first step. The realization energized him in a way he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't excitement in the loud, dramatic sense. It was quieter than that. More like a steady confidence beginning to grow beneath the surface. The kind that says, now you know where to begin. That same day, he took a small action he had been postponing. Nothing heroic, nothing life-changing overnight. Just one decision aligned with the clarity he had discovered. And that small action created a ripple effect. One step naturally led to another. The interesting thing about momentum is that it often begins invisibly. People outside rarely notice the early stages of change, but internally, Everything starts reorganizing. Confidence grows, direction becomes sharper, and the man who once felt completely lost was beginning to realize something surprising. The answers he had been searching for weren't hidden somewhere far away. They had been waiting quietly inside his own mind all along. They simply needed silence to be heard. But this single realization was only the beginning. Because when a person consistently creates space for clarity, their habits start changing, their choices start improving, and eventually, their entire life begins moving in a new direction. The change didn't happen overnight. There was no sudden moment where his entire life flipped like a switch. Instead, the transformation unfolded quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Day after day, step after step, those silent walks continued. And with each morning, the man who once felt lost began slowly reshaping his life. His mornings became the foundation of everything else. Before the noise of the world reached him, he already had clarity. Before problems appeared, his mind had already settled. Those walks became his daily reset button, a space where intention replaced confusion. People around him started noticing small differences. He spoke with more certainty. His decisions came faster and with less hesitation. The man who once overthought everything now moved with calm focus. Not because life had become easier, but because his mind had become stronger. The walks also changed the way he approached challenges. Instead of reacting immediately, he paused. He would reflect during his morning walks, letting solutions emerge naturally. Sometimes the answer appeared halfway down the street. Other times it arrived just as the sun began rising. What surprised him most was how simple the process remained. There were no complicated systems, no expensive programs, just a pair of shoes, quiet streets, and time alone with his thoughts. Yet that simple ritual had begun reorganizing his entire mindset. Gradually, the direction of his life became clearer. The goals he once feared now felt reachable. The doubts that once filled his mind lost their grip. And with every decision aligned to his growing clarity, progress followed, one steady step at a time. There's a powerful lesson hidden in moments like this. Many people believe transformation requires dramatic change, but often it begins with a single habit practiced consistently, one action repeated quietly every day, small enough to start, powerful enough to reshape a life. Months passed, and the man who once woke up overwhelmed now greeted the morning with calm anticipation. The silence that once felt uncomfortable had become his greatest teacher. His mind was no longer a crowded battlefield. It had become something else entirely, a place where ideas, direction, and purpose could grow. And eventually, his story revealed something worth sharing with others. Not a complicated philosophy, not a secret reserved for a few, just a simple truth about clarity, silence, and the power of daily steps. There's something powerful hidden inside stories like this. At first glance, it almost feels too simple to matter. After all, how could something as ordinary as walking quietly change a life? Yet, if you look closely, the transformation didn't come from the walking itself. It came from the space that the walking created. In a world overflowing with noise, silence has become rare. Phones buzz constantly. Notifications compete for attention. Voices, opinions, and information flood the mind from every direction. And somewhere in that noise, people slowly lose connection with their own thoughts. But the mind works differently when it's given room to breathe. When movement is simple and distractions disappear, something interesting happens. Thoughts begin to slow down. Important ideas rise to the surface, and clarity appears where confusion once lived. That's the quiet wisdom hidden in his story. He didn't discover some secret reserved for extraordinary people. He simply gave his mind something most people never allow anymore: silence and time. Two things that cost nothing, yet hold enormous power. Anyone watching this story can experiment with the same idea. It doesn't require perfect conditions or long hours of free time. Even 10 or 15 quiet minutes can begin changing the rhythm of your mind. Walk through your neighborhood, a nearby park, or even a quiet street. Just leave the noise behind. No phone in your hand. No music filling the silence. Just your footsteps and your thoughts. Ask yourself simple questions about your life, and allow the answers to arrive naturally instead of forcing them. The first days might feel uncomfortable. Your mind may wander or bring up thoughts you've been avoiding. That's completely normal. In fact, that's often the first sign that your mind is finally clearing the clutter. The important part is simply continuing, because over time, something remarkable tends to happen. Clarity grows where confusion once lived. Confidence replaces hesitation, and the direction that once felt invisible slowly begins to reveal itself, just as it did for the man whose quiet morning steps changed everything.